Good afternoon and welcome to ROM. My name is Dave Evans. I'm Temerity Chair in Vertebrate Paleontology and Co-Chief Curator Natural History here at the museum. I'm delighted that you could join us for today's digital program in support of our special exhibition, Wildcats. The exhibition was created by the Musée National d'Histoire Naturelle in France and is generally supported by the Royal Exhibitions Circle. We begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabeg Nation, which includes the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation from time immemorial to today. Today, we ask the question, just how wild is your cat? My guest today is biologist Jonathan Losos, whose latest book, The Cat's Meow: How Cats Evolved from the Savanna to Your Sofa, explores how researchers today are unraveling the secrets of the cat using all the tools of modern technology. From GPS tracking to genomics to forensic archaeology, his book gives us a cat's eye view of our house cat companions, as well as an inside look at their wildcat cousins from around the world, whose habits your sweet house cat sometimes eerily parallels. Humans are transforming cats, and in turn, they're transforming the world around them. What may the future hold for both Felis catus and Homo sapiens? I encourage everyone to submit your questions and thoughts via the Q&A feature in the Zoom during the program, and we'll do our best to answer them during the program. The program is going to consist of about a 25 to 30-minute Q&A session here with me, a chat between me and Jonathan, and then we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. So please put those questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So now I'll introduce our speaker. Today's speaker is Jonathan Losos, a world-renowned evolutionary biologist known for his research on how lizards evolve and adapt to changing environments. A graduate of Harvard University and the University of California, he has held faculty positions at Washington University and at Harvard. In 2018, at Washington University, he was appointed as the inaugural William H. Danforth Distinguished University Professor and director of the Living Earth Collaborative, a partnership between Washington U, the St. Louis Zoo, and the Missouri Botanical Garden. This new biodiversity center, nearly unique in partnering a leading university, a zoo, and a garden, has its mission to advance knowledge of biodiversity and to ensure the future of Earth species in their many forms. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Losos.
Well, many thanks, Dave. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be able to talk with you. I, of course, know your work on lizards quite well, being a vertebrate evolutionary biologist myself. But I think I need to start this discussion here and ask you, how does a lizard expert come to write a book about cats?
Well, that's an obvious question. My friends and colleagues who, when they learned that I wrote a book on cats, are puzzled because I've spent my entire career studying lizards and their evolution. And that interest in reptiles began when I was a little boy, starting with dinosaurs, like so many kids. And as shown by this, the photograph in the middle, I was a handsome young guy, as you can see. But at the same time I was becoming fascinated with reptiles, I was also falling for cats. The photograph on the right is me with our first household cat, Tammy. She was a rescue Siamese we got from a shelter when I was 5, given to my father as a birthday present. And 2 years later, we got another rescue Siamese on the left, Marisha. And ever since then, I've been crazy about cats. But as I grew up and as my career began, it never occurred to me to do anything scientifically with cats for 2 reasons. One is I wanted to go out into nature and observe animals as they went about their daily lives. And anyone who's tried to follow a cat around knows just how impossible that is. As soon as they figure out what you're doing, which is right away, they quickly give you the shake and disappear into the bushes or whatever. So cats just didn't seem to be a good research subject. And moreover, I was under the impression that there really wasn't any interesting research being done on cats. And by cats, I mean the domestic cat, Felis catus, not lions and tigers and ocelots and so on. Well, about a dozen years ago, I came to realize that I was wrong, that in fact, there is a lot of interesting research being done on the domestic cat, using all the latest techniques that I and my colleagues use, GPS tracking, genome sequencing, chemical analysis, and so on. And then I had what I humbly submit was a brilliant idea. I would teach a first-year university class called The Science of Cats for students just beginning university. And I would lure them in on their interest in cats and then teach them how we study biodiversity, how we study animals using cats as the vehicle. And that worked really well. And it wasn't much of a jump from there to writing a book for the general public with the same idea, telling people all kinds of stuff about cats and how we know that information, how scientists actually study them. And I did not expect, but I've actually begun doing cat research myself because I've become so fascinated in that research, something I didn't really expect when I got started. So that's the route from lizards to cats and why I've written this book and why I'm now doing research on them myself.
That makes a lot of sense. My first two animal loves were dinosaurs, as you mentioned,
Good
and
man.
cats. In fact, when I was a baby, my family had a Siamese cat. And I'm looking at the picture of you and a Siamese cat. And they were afraid it literally jumped into the crib with me when I was a baby, and they were afraid it was gonna, sleep on my head and suffocate me. Thank goodness it didn't. But I love cats just the same. So we have a cats exhibition here at the ROM. It is a really, really neat exhibition that explores cat diversity, both, from the biological side, but also their influence on human culture. And I think one of the neatest parts of the exhibition is when you walk in, you're greeted with this cat wall, and you get to see, basically come face to face with the diversity of cat species that are alive today. And so let's start this discussion of cats with the evolutionary beginnings of the house cat. So where did domestic cats come from? What are their closest relatives? What is their closest relative or relatives within the cat family tree?
Well, what a spectacular exhibit that is. I'm very envious of you, those of you in Toronto who get to see it. There are 42 species of living felines today, and everyone knows the big cats, the ones that you can see very clearly here, lions, tigers, leopards, cheetahs, and so on. But that only constitutes about 9 of the living species. The other 33 are little known small cat species that occur in South America, Africa, and Asia and Europe. And in theory, any one of those small cats could be the ancestor of the domestic cat. But we actually know what that ancestor is, and that's the African wildcat. That is a species that occurs throughout Africa. And I should say that wildcat, there's a lovely photo, rather drawing of one from Egypt. And wildcat is the name of the species. It's not just a wildcat, it is the African wildcat. And as you can see, it looks very similar to a domestic cat. I like to say that if you saw an African wildcat, say, walking down Bloor Street in front of the ROM, you wouldn't say, what's an African wildcat doing in Toronto? You'd say, what a cool looking cat. I've never seen one quite like it. And so they are, in terms of their appearance, very similar. And for that reason, they have long been suspected to be the ancestor of the domestic cat. And in recent years, people have looked at the DNA of these two species and all felines, and it is very clear that, in fact, the North African wildcat is the ancestor of the domestic cat, that they were domesticated somewhere, probably in the area we call the Middle East, a few thousand years ago.
So in the book, which is fascinating, by the way, I read it over the last few weeks, you refer to house cats as semi-domesticated or barely domesticated. I think a lot of cat owners, know where you're coming from. And you state that non-pedigreed domestic cats are just not that different from their wildcat ancestors. So from an evolutionary perspective, just how similar are they? Genetically, morphologically, what are the differences?
Well, that's a great question. And just looking at them, you can see they're just not that different. Consider the difference between a dog and a wolf or a pig and a wild boar. Just in overall appearance, domestic cats are very similar to their ancestors. And in fact, there are only 2 anatomical features that can always distinguish the two. First is the length of the intestines. domestic cats have longer guts, and that's because they tend to eat more people food, grains and other things that they get being around people, whereas wild cats are purely carnivores, and longer guts are better for digesting that. It's not to say, I do want to emphasize that a vegetarian diet is not appropriate for a domestic cat. They need a lot of meat, but they can digest a little bit of other stuff. The other difference is the size of the brain. The domestic cat's brain is about a quarter, about 25% smaller than a wild cat of the same size. And you might say, oh my God, are you telling me that my little Oliver is stupid? And the answer is no. In fact, domestic animals in general have smaller brains than their wild ancestors. And it's a particular part of the brain that has gotten smaller. It is the amygdala and other parts of the limbic system that are involved in fear and aggression and overall reactivity. And I think you can well imagine that a domestic animal needs to tamp those aspects down just to be able to live with humans and all the ruckus we cause. And so they do have smaller brains and longer intestines, and that's about it. And of course, that doesn't help you if you're seeing a living cat and you can't measure its intestines or its brain size. But those are the only features that always tell them apart. People have looked at their genomes now, and there are some genetic differences, but not very many. Only about a third as many, for example, as differences between dogs and wolves. So those are the senses in which we say that cats are barely domesticated. They're just not that different from their wild ancestors, which also explains why they can so easily revert to a wild existence.
I thought it was pretty neat to learn that the part of the brain that's associated with like that what you just said, the fear and reactivity is reduced through domestication. It makes so much sense from an evolutionary perspective. Let's shift to behavior, and you say that if you can decode behavior in domestic cats, that you can do it in wild cats. And so this alludes to the genetic similarity. They have a lot of behavior similarities as well. What are some notable behaviors that the two share, that we might, that we might find familiar?
Well, people who've lived with cats get pretty good at reading their body language, if you will. And the same thing is true of wild cats. They'll flatten their ears when they're mad. They just change their body shape if they're nervous or feeling threatened. Of course, their stalking and hunting behaviors, the same sort of actions. I've talked to zookeepers about this, and they basically say, if you can read your cat at home, you can read what the cats in the zoo are saying, that they are very similar animals in many respects.
Some of the interesting evolutionary things that you note in your book is that there was some juvenilization in domestication of cats. And you refer to some of the ways that they communicate, both vocally as well as physically, the meows and mews, as well as like the kneading that we all know. If we've spent a lot of time with cats, they'll jump on you and start kneading. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what that means?
Yes, absolutely. So there aren't many behavioral differences between domestic cats and wild cats, but there are a few, and a couple of them are very interesting. One is, as you referred to, people who live with cats are familiar with what is called kneading or making biscuits, where the cat will get into a state where it goes like this on your belly or maybe on a blanket, and they seem to go into a trance, and they're moving their forelimbs like this and pushing and very focused. Wild cat adults do not do this, but kittens and cubs of all feline species do that when they're nursing, when they're drinking milk from their mother. They will do that to her belly, and it is thought that it is a way of stimulating milk flow. And so what seems to have happened is that adult cats have retained this juvenile behavior, perhaps as a way of bonding with people, because it is something they use with their mothers, and maybe they've just hung on to it as adults. Now, the other example is, to me, was a real revelation when I looked into it. Again, people who've lived with cats are familiar with cats meowing to us, and they're clearly trying to communicate. And I had always assumed that domestic cats meow to each other to communicate, and that by meowing to us, they're just including us in their social circle and including us in their network. But in fact, researchers who have studied colonies of domestic cats have noticed that cats do not meow to each other very often. They communicate in other ways. They hiss, they growl, and the body postures, but they don't meow to each other. And the only time that meowing is used among cats, or primarily, is kittens and their mothers will make the kittens will make this mewing sound, which is a juvenile meow, and mothers will meow back. And so again, the fact that they are meowing to us is a trait that has evolved during domestication. That is the retention of a juvenile trait.
The other thing I found really interesting when it comes to sort of vocalizations or communicating by sound is this idea that purring um, has evolved in the domestication through domestication to cue into some of our responses to our own young. This is really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
cat purring and what it might mean to us?
yeah, absolutely. And this is fascinating. So purrs, cats will have multiple different purrs that they use. And the two primary ones, one is the very gentle, soothing purr that a cat in your lap when you're petting her will make. Kind of a brr, brr. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I just love that sound. It's very soothing. But they have another purr that is much louder and more insistent, somewhat chainsaw like a brr, brr, brr. And they do that when they want something. Most obviously, if you're in your kitchen opening a can of wet food and the cat is rubbing up against your legs and making this really loud sound. And so a researcher in the United Kingdom decided to study this, a woman named Karen McComb. And so what she did was she recorded cats purring in two contexts. One was a happy cat that was being petted and the nice soothing purr. And the other, she wanted to get what she called the insistence purr. And to do that, she found people who always fed their cats first thing in the morning, as soon as they woke up. That is a terrible idea because cats are very smart and they quickly learn when you get up, they get fed. And so they will try to get you up sometimes. And so what she told these people is when your alarm goes off in the morning, don't get out of bed. Just lie there. And she had them put a recording device right next to their heads. Sure enough, within a minute or two of the alarm going off, the cat would jump up on the bed, position itself right next to the person's ear, and start doing this brr, brr. And they were able to record the more insistence purr. Well, then what McComb did is she did a digital analysis of the sound, breaking it into the different sound waves. And the analysis showed one clear distinction between the insistence and the contentment purr. And that was a very low frequency sound, was very loud, much louder in the insistence purr. Now, I thought that was a really cool technical analysis showing that the two purrs really are different and showing what part of them was different. So that was cool. But then the paper went, I thought, a little bit too far. It said, look, this peak in the low frequency sounds that the insistence purr has, that is at the exact same peak as a human baby crying. And as you know, humans are innately sensitive to that sound and reactive to it. And so the idea was that essentially the cats were hijacking our behaviors and our responsiveness to our own babies to get our attention. I was dubious. That just fell into the category of that's too good to be true. But the paper, along with the paper, there were recordings, audio files that you could listen to online, and I listened to them, and sure enough, I could hear a baby crying. And when I give a talk on this, I play the sounds to audiences and ask who can hear a baby crying, and about half the people raise their hand. So you can find these online if you just Google, cat insistence purr or purring when wants something. You can find some and listen for yourself and see if you hear a baby there or not.
Yeah, that's totally amazing. It makes sense, of course, from an evolutionary perspective, to key into that response in us. But it's totally fascinating. I'm definitely going to try to listen for it next time I hear a cat purr. We're gonna switch gears a little bit now from the social behaviors of our domestic cats to the social lives of wild cats. So we got some lions here from the exhibition, and lions are special in a number of ways, but perhaps maybe the most notable way that they're special among cats is their social behavior. Most cats are solitary hunters as adults, and lions have these big prides, which are complex social systems. So could you talk a little bit about lion prides? How did they evolve, and why did they evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So lions are known as the only social wild species of cat. And that's because they live in these prides. And prides are composed, the basis, the core of prides are the females. They're often related females, say a grandmother, her daughters, and their daughters. So the related females, the males, as they grow up, they leave the pride and go elsewhere, but the females often remain. And so they're related to each other. And they're remarkably friendly. They will lie next to each other, they'll play with each other, they groom each other. Females will even nurse each other's cubs if they have them at the same time. So they're renowned for their sociality. And scientists initially thought that the reason was to bring down big prey because lions are also known for cooperative hunting, allowing them to kill prey much larger than a typical solitary cat. Sometimes they can kill mid-sized elephants, which is remarkable. And so that seemed to be the advantage of prides. However, when scientists actually studied it and carefully and did the math, if you will, they found that yes, they could kill larger prey, but they also had more mouths to feed. And so the amount of meat per cat did not necessarily increase when you had a bigger pride. And so killing larger things didn't seem to be the reason, but a related topic was, and that is the larger your pride, the better the territory you can control, keeping other lion prides away, and also defending your pride against other roaming males or packs of hyenas. And so it seems that it's not the killing the large prey per se, but the ability to control the prime territory. And one more thing I would say about that is, I lost my train of thought for a second there. Well, it'll
Well,
come back to me.
defending kills in Africa against hyenas makes a lot of sense. Having more bodies, bigger bodies to protect those kills, which are pretty vulnerable if they're made in isolation. Yeah, I always you're sort of conditioned to think that hunting in numbers would result in better success, but it's actually better to defend the territory. Seems like the reason that it was evolved to defend.
I remembered what I was going to say, but then you prompted another thought. So let me hit you with both.
All right, yeah.
There's one other reason for defense that it's useful for large groups of females, and it's kind of a ugly one. But what happens with lions and happens with many other types of animals is when new males take over the pride, they kill all the young cubs, which sounds horrible and seems, how could that evolve? But for the males' advantage, males don't tend to be in charge of territories very long. They need to reproduce as quickly as possible. And the fastest way to do that is to basically kill the cubs of the other males, get them out of the way. The females will come back into reproductive condition and breed more readily. So it sounds horrible, but that is the logic of natural selection. Well, the larger the size of a pride, the more able the females are to defend their cubs against the males so that at least some of them survive. And so that's another sort of defense that plays into the logic. But the point I couldn't remember was, you might ask, well, why does this occur in lions and not tigers or jaguars? And the difference is that lions live in these areas where the prey base is extraordinarily rich, because to maintain a group of animals in the same pride, you need a lot of food. And if the prey were thin on the ground, they just couldn't kill enough to support themselves. But the richness of the food gives them the opportunity to have large numbers of animals living in one place.
So speaking of territories, domestic cats seem to interact with other cats, pretty readily and easily. What level of sociality do domestic cats have with each other?
Well, that's a great question, and I have to recognize that these are the cats to whom I am their servant. This is Winston, the gray and white one, and Nelson. And I was hoping they would come by, and maybe they will in a few minutes. But so cats are generally considered to be aloof animals, not particularly social, as opposed to, say, dogs. It turns out that that is not entirely true. In fact, it's not true at all, that in some circumstances, when you have large numbers of cats living together, they can be very social. Now, other than living in a house where people just buy lots of cats or bring in lots of cats, why would there be a lot of cats living together? Well, the answer is the same as with lions, when there's a lot of food. Now, where does that occur? For example, in fishing villages, where the fisher people every day throw the scraps onto a pile, that will attract a lot of cats and you'll get a big population density. Or in modern life in Toronto and elsewhere, there are many stray cats, what are called homeless, unowned cats, that are fed by people, and you put out lots of food, and that attracts a lot of cats. So when you have a situation like that, the domestic cats living together, these are unowned cats, they form into social groups that are very similar to a lion's pride. Again, they are based on relatedness. They are groups of females that behave just like a lion's pride. They lie next to each other, they play, they groom, they nurse each other's kittens. They even assist in, I guess we'd call it kitten birth, one female helping another give birth to her kittens. And so it's very parallel to lion prides. And the reason is there's lots of food. However, in some of these places, you will have dozens, if not hundreds of cats. They're not all one big happy group. Rather, they are groups that have their own territory, and then there's another group next to them. And they will be very friendly to their own group members, but not at all friendly to members of other groups. And one scientist has said the basic rule of thumb of a cat is if you've known another cat your entire life, then be friendly to it. It must be a relative, a group member. But if you meet a new cat, be much more cautious and unfriendly.
Huh.
And that actually has a lesson to us. If you're going to get multiple cats, you're much better off getting litter mates. They'll grow up together than trying to introduce two cats at a later time.
Oh, that's really cool. Ari, we'll talk a little bit more about our assumptions about cats' lives. We're all familiar with the saying, when the cat's away, the mice play. But what are the cats doing when they're away? I mean, cats are famously secretive. And I think we're all fascinated by the secret lives of cats. So can you tell us maybe a bit about how technology and science has shed light on cats' urban ecology and their
Absolutely.
social lives as when we let them out the back door?
Yes. So my two cats here are wearing trackers. They're commercial products that use GPS information to tell you where they are, and it allows you to follow your cats. And in fact, I've got a little app on my phone. Let's see if I can call it up quickly. And this tells me, I don't know if you can see it, but the green lines are our backyard, and both the cats, one cat's in the house and one's just on the back porch. So using these, you can follow where your cats are going. And some scientists have actually had citizen science projects where they enlist people to put a tracker on and they can get data sets on lots of cats. So where do they go? Well, it varies from cat to cat and from the sort of place you live. Some cats, and we're talking, of course, about cats that are allowed outdoors. Some cats don't go very far at all. Most will have a very small home range, if you will, of maybe going to the few houses around them. And then at the other extreme, there are a few cats that travel widely. This is particularly important. People have wondered, how often do cats go into natural areas if there's one nearby? Most cats stay away from those areas, but a few will go into them and could potentially be problems there. Now, there's another interesting finding that comes up repeatedly, and that is your cat, you may think, loves you and is devoted to you, but they often have multiple houses that they visit. And where people who have little flaps that the cat can go in and out, you'll see the tracker signal in the middle of your neighbor's house. That's because he or she has gone in, often will eat food, will interact with the cats there and the people. And it's quite common that cats will have several different households looking after them. Oh,
There's
I
a
should say
great
one other technology is used is you can get little kitty cameras. And again, these are commercial products. They're not very expensive. You put it on the collar, just like these trackers are, and it gives you a cat's eye view of where your cat goes and what it's doing. It takes some getting used to because it bounces up and down. You can get a little bit seasick, but once you get the gist of it, you can see where your cat is going and what she's doing.
There's a funny story from your book where you're monitoring your cats with the app and they run around, but you get a bit concerned when they get to the busy road and you think they've figured that out. They just want you to come and get them.
So Nelson here, would wander around for a while, and then he would head up to this moderately busy street. And this is during COVID times when I was working at home all the time. So I just keep an eye on him. And when he got near that street, I would go running up there, pick him up, and carry him home. And I began to suspect that he just did that when he was tired. Instead of just walking home, he would know I can go up to the street and essentially call an Uber, and 2 minutes later, it'll be up there to carry me home. Now, I would say we couldn't tolerate this. This one of the reasons it's not a good idea, one of the disadvantages of letting your cat out is they do get run over quite frequently. And so finally, we had a fence, but he would just jump over it. We put wiring on it to make it more difficult, and so now. And it's worked surprisingly well, actually. He does occasionally dig a hole or find a way out, but that has kept him in our backyard, which makes us much happier. He's much safer that way.
Um, I want to talk a little bit about cat breeds because I think this is a really fascinating area. We can all probably name a dozen or 2 dozen breeds of dogs off the top of our heads, but I don't think that's true with cats. Is there, are there fewer specialty breeds of cats than dogs? And if so, what might be the reasons for that?
Well, there are fewer breeds than dogs. It depends who you ask and which organization you're talking to, but there may be 200 to 400 breeds of dogs and maybe 45 to 75 breeds of cats. And the difference probably is due to two things. One is dogs were domesticated much earlier than cats, perhaps according to some sources, as much as 20 or 30,000 years ago, whereas cats, let's call it 5,000 years ago. Moreover, many breeds are descended from dogs that were bred to do things, to hunt, to guard, to go down burrows, and so on. And so the differences in dogs were shaped by utility, whereas, as you know, it's hard to get cats to do anything you want, and so that has never happened. Finally, one last thing, a key event in cat breed development and domestication was the invention of kitty litter, which didn't occur until 1947. And before then, it was difficult to keep cats inside. Some intrepid souls did, but they had to put up with the stink and the mess. If you couldn't keep cats inside, you couldn't control their mating, which is critical for developing breeds. And so with the invention of kitty litter, it suddenly became much easier to have a cat. Cat popularity rose, and the number of breeds accelerated since that time.
And so we were talking about how kitty litter was invented, and was it invented in the mechanics shop essentially? They were trying to clean up like gasoline and oil and other chemical spills, and then somebody realized that the cats like to go in it.
Absolutely. If I understand, it was someone who had a hardware store and sold to shops, things you could put on the floor to sop up grease and so on. And one woman came in one day in the winter and said, I have to keep the cat indoors and it's making a mess. What can I do? And the salesman just had an inspiration. Why don't you try the stuff that we sell to shops to sop up grease and so on? And she took it. And the next week she came back ecstatic and wanted more. And the guy realized I'm onto something here. And that literally led to the invention of kitty litter.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we use kitty litter. It's well known that if you have your oil leaks or something or gas in your garage, that you go to the kitty litter. It's funny. It was actually invented for that, and it's sort of coming full circle.
Exactly. Yes.
Do you want to maybe talk about some of the different breeds of cats? Like, I think they're getting morphologically more different and more wild. My sister has one of these Sphinx cats, hairless one, and I didn't realize until I was digging into this for this presentation that the Sphinx cat is called the Canadian Sphinx, and it was first bred in Toronto of all places. So, I think it looks like ET basically. But what are some of these other interesting breeds that we might not know about?
Well, most of the breeds that have been developed are the result of a single mutation that occurs that leads to a different appearance. And that's the case of the Sphinx. Its hairlessness, the Sphinx is the one on the bottom right, is the result of a single mutation that, as you say, first occurred in Toronto. And people bred members of the same litter with each other, with other cats, but bred for that trait and ended up producing the Sphinx. And in fact, all 6 of the breeds that you have shown here are all the results of single mutations. And so that has been responsible for many of the new breeds, not all of them. Some of them are a longer term project where somebody has the idea of breeding a cat that looks in a particular way and just shapes it as natural selection works, generation after generation, choosing those closest to what they're shooting for, and developing cats that can be quite different from your typical cat. And then one other means that has occurred and people aren't so wild about anymore was breeding domestic cats with wild cats to produce a hybrid, and then breeding those hybrids back to domestic cats. And that is the way that the Bengal cat, which is a gorgeous cat, was created, by breeding a domestic cat with the Asian leopard cat, and then breeding those offspring back to domestic cats. So the Bengal now is 96% domestic cat genes, but some of those leopard cat genes have influenced its appearance, and it's a spotted, beautiful cat.
Can you take us through some of the breeds that are pictured here? There's like the stubby legged one
Yes,
and the folded ears. Yeah, can you talk just briefly about the ones that are on screen?
I will, and I do want to say that the development of breeds is controversial. There are some people who are against it. I think there's two main reasons. One is, there are plenty of cats looking for homes in the shelter, just your regular old street cats. What do we need to? You should go to the shelter and get a cat. That's a matter of ethical opinion. The second reason is that some of these breeds, the traits that they're bred for, may be detrimental to the cats. And I really agree that there's really there's no ethical justification for breeding a cat that will not be well. And so these 6 cats, let's start at the one in the upper left. That is the Scottish fold. It is the result of a mutation that causes the ears to lie down forward. And many people consider this to be cute. And if that's all that it happened, it might be okay. It certainly must impair their hearing as well. But it turns out the reason the ears fold down is that there's a problem with the cartilage. And that problem extends to the entire cat, not just the ears. And so they are known to have cartilage problems that can be quite painful. And so much so that in Europe, a number of countries have banned the breeding of these cats. Now, the one in the middle bottom is the Munchkin. It is a cat with very short legs, again, the result of a single mutation. Many people look at that cat and they just think you shouldn't do that to a cat. They also are concerned. We refer to the Munchkin as the corgi of cats. And many people know that short-legged dogs have spinal problems. However, this seems not to be the case with Munchkins. Cats are built differently than dogs. As far as we are aware, there are really no specific health issues to Munchkins. And so in that respect, they're perfectly fine. The Sphinx, very healthy cat. Yes, you would not want to keep it outside in a Toronto winter, but as long as you're not stupid, the cats are perfectly healthy. The other 3 cats, the Cornish Rex, top middle, has a mutation that makes his hair wavy. The one on the top right is a newly developed cat called the Lycoy, which has this unusual color called ronin, and there are patches of the fur falls out periodically, as around the eyes in this cat. I do not find this to be a very attractive cat, but some people seem to think so. Again, it's a single mutation. And finally, the cat on the bottom left is the ragdoll. They get that name because they have a mutation that if you pick them up, they kind of go limp in your arms, hence a ragdoll. This is incidentally the cat that Taylor Swift has, that she was on the cover of Time magazine with one around her neck. So these are some of the extremes of new breeds that have been developed in recent years.
So I want to come back to this. As a paleontologist, over your shoulder right now, I can see a cast skull of a Smilodon, the classic saber-toothed tiger or saber cat. But we don't have a lot of time to discuss that. But there's an interesting passage in your book that relates to this, talking about the future of the domesticated cat. So let's go to the next slide. And what do you think the future of the house cat is? And this was a fun thought experiment. I mean, all the saber-toothed cats are extinct. The last ones went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene about 10,000 years ago. But why are there no saber cats around today? And could we selectively or breed or genetically engineer a saber-toothed house cat?
Well, I had fun with this in the book, and my wonderful illustrator, David Tuss, made this drawing. The basis for it was that saber teeth have evolved 4 times in mammals, in cats, in some close relatives of cats, and even in marsupials. And so it must be a trait that's not that hard to evolve. We don't actually understand the function, even to this day, of saber teeth, but it's evolved multiple times. I think if someone wanted to breed them, and I'm not recommending this, you could do it the old-fashioned way of just breeding cats with slightly longer canines and do it generation after generation. And who knows, you might end up with this. With new modern genetic technology, we actually have DNA from saber-toothed cats from several places around the world preserved. They were around until 10,000 years ago. And so we have the DNA from them that in theory, we could find the genes responsible for that elongation and use genetic engineering to produce that. Again, a lot of people think that would be a terrible idea for multiple reasons. In theory, I suspect this could be done. More generally, for the future of cats, I think it's moving in 2 directions. On the one hand, there are lots of feral cats on every continent in the world except Antarctica. And by feral, I mean truly living on their own, not unowned outdoor cats that are being fed by people. These cats are experiencing new conditions, such as the blistering heat in the Australian outback or the cold and snow in the mountains of New Zealand. They are all over the world. One of the things that we know is that when species experience new conditions, they evolve and adapt very quickly. We've seen that now in all kinds of different organisms. My expectation, I'm convinced that feral cat populations are probably evolving as we speak to adapt to where they live. Given enough time, they probably will end up being new species. On the other hand, it has been suggested what we really need to do is to develop a breed of house cat that likes living in apartment buildings and in enclosed spaces, cats that don't want to go outside. And if they do go outside, they don't want to hunt. Given that everything else that we've been able to do with cats and with dogs, I suspect that if we put our mind to it, we could develop such a breed, which would really be a domestic cat for the 21st century and beyond. And I suspect that will happen one of these days.
That's super interesting to think about, Jonathan. I'm going to shift, let's shift to answering some audience questions while we've got some time here before our hour ends. Um, we've got a number of them, so I'll just start reading through some of them. So, do wild cats purr at all or just domesticated cats?
Excellent question. It turns out that all of the small cats purr, and also even say the cheetah purrs, but the real big cats, the lions, the tigers, leopards, and so on, they do not purr because they have different vocal cord structure that allows them to roar. But all the other ones do purr.
Um, is my single cat lonely? Do cats need or want another cat in the home?
Well, that is a tough question, and there's a lot of variation from one cat to the next. But many cats will be very social if they grow up with litter mates, or sometimes you can introduce cats, and there are plenty of books by cat whisperers that will tell you how to do it, and they can sometimes become very friendly. So, are they lonely? It depends on the cat and its upraising.
Here's one that I thought of as well when we were talking about behavior. Why do my cats bring me half-dead animals and put them on my porch, or bring them to my living room, or in this case he says put them on, or they say put me on my chest in the morning? Is um what are they thinking? Why do they have that behavior of sort of bringing these catches to their human owners?
So that is a great question, and it shows the difficulty of actually studying evolution. Why should such a behavior have evolved? Well, we don't have time machines. We can't go back and study it in the past, and so it makes it very hard to answer questions like that. If you go on the internet, here's something I learned in writing my book, and it's going to be a shock to the audience here, but you can't believe everything you read on the internet. There's plenty of stuff about cats that is not scientifically supported. So if you look it up online, there will be explanations for why cats do that. I think the real answer is we really don't know. But my favorite explanation is that your cat realizes that you are an inept hunter and is trying to train you to hunt just like a female trains her kittens by bringing them prey for them to play with and learn their hunting techniques. And so she's trying to do the same thing to you, and probably very disappointed in your dumbness.
Why is my cat meowing in the middle of the night when it knows we're sleeping?
You know, there are so many explanations. They are contrary. They might be just doing it just to get you. They might be saying, hey, get up and give me some food or something. And it's one of those things they learn. If you do get up sometimes and give them something, well, you've just rewarded them for that behavior. And whether you're training them or they are training you is probably a semantic point. Incidentally, cats are very trainable. People think that they're not, but cats are very food motivated. You can train them to do all kinds of things, including using a toilet. They'll get up on the seat and do their business in the toilet. I don't know that you can train them to flush it, but you can train them to use a toilet.
Yeah, I think you can. I feel like I've seen that on YouTube at some point.
Yeah.
What is the most surprising thing you learned about cats in your research?
Well, that's there's so many surprising things. The fact that they don't meow to us, um, I think that caught me by surprise. Some of the things that about the ancestry and how it's been studied were fascinating. One archaeologist has examined cat remains from archaeological exhibits and extracted DNA from them to try to chart the diaspora of cats into the world, and found the thing that made that study go viral was what became known as Viking cats. And there are all these memes of cats wearing little helmets with little horns on them. It was because there was evidence in a Viking seaport village in northern Germany from 700 AD that it had been assumed that cats got all the way up to the northern end of Europe by just migrating from the Roman Empire. But the DNA showed that they had actually been transported from the Mediterranean area around Egypt, that presumably the Vikings had gone in their long ships all the way around Europe, gone to the Mediterranean, picked up some cats and brought them back. Now, they didn't go there to get the cats, but while they were there, they either grabbed some or cats jumped on board. And that explains in part the distribution of cats today.
This is kind of a fun one. There are people who advertise themselves as cat psychics who will meet and analyze your cat's behavior. I've never heard of this, but I do not doubt it. This sounds silly, but is there any evidence for certain people being more in tune with their cat's way of thinking?
Well, when you call them a cat psychic, that seems I'm dubious. There are cat behavioralists, some of them who have various advanced degrees, who are just particularly observant and knowledgeable about cats. And it's certainly true that some people can just, as in the study of any animal and its behavior, can get to really understand subtle signals that many people will miss out on. So cat behaviorists, yes, absolutely. Psychics, a little dubious.
Is Nelson a Burmese cat?
Now, this is interesting. Nelson is actually a European Burmese. Burmese come, as the name implies, from that part of Asia. They're closely related to Siamese cats. But when they were first brought out in the 1940s, very quickly, people in Britain and people in the United States started breeding them differently. And what we here in North America call the European Burmese is what the Europeans bred them, which is pretty faithful to what Asian cats are like. They're like Siamese. They're relatively slender with a pointy nose, a wedge-shaped head is the term. In America, for reasons that are unclear, we bred them to change them quite substantially to have a broader head, rounder eyes, and a shorter muzzle, which is not a good thing for cats. Persian cats are the extreme in that. And why the Americans changed the Burmese that way, I don't know. But now they are distinct breeds. In North America, we call them the European Burmese and the Burmese. In the rest of the world, they're called the American Burmese. And what we call the European Burmese is called the Burmese. That was complicated, but in any case, they're two breeds of Burmese cats.
There's a couple of questions that relate to this. Is there an evolutionary reason for the zoomies? So some cats, and I know dogs do this as well, where they'll get a sudden burst of energy and like run laps around the house. Is there an evolutionary reason for that behavior?
That's another great question. I really don't think we we have a good idea on that. One of the things that even though we've studied, there's much more scientific research on cats than I anticipated a few years ago, there are still so many questions that no one has studied, particularly the behavior of domestic cats and the evolutionary context. There's so much that could be done. A lot more has been done with dogs, and that's because you can take a dog to a lab and they'll be happy to run tests on them. And so there are faculty in different universities who have a dog lab, and all it is a room where people bring their dogs, they run them through the trials, and the dogs go home. Cats, generally that doesn't work because they're more place-based, and you take them to an unfamiliar place and they're kind of freaked out. But there's a lot more to learn about cats that in theory one could study.
Um, of course, cat allergies are something that are well known. And can you please speak about hypoallergenic cats? Like, is there a way that we can genetically engineer cats to be less allergenic to humans?
That is a fascinating topic with a lot of interesting science that I really learned a lot as I got into that in my book. A surprising proportion of the world population is allergic to cats, 15 to 20% or so. Most people, it's relatively minor. It gives you a cold-like symptoms or the sniffles, but a few people react very badly and end up in the emergency room from it. We know what causes that, and it's a protein that is produced in their saliva. And when cats they groom themselves, they lick themselves, they get the saliva on their fur, it then dries up, flakes off into the air, and it becomes dander, and people breathe it in and react to it. So in theory, there are all we have to do is to get the cats to stop producing this protein. And it is said that some breeds of cats are hypoallergenic, often the Siberian or the Sphinx. And it is true that individual cats can vary greatly in how much of this protein they produce. It's not clear that breeds really are hypoallergenic. It may be that Siberians and Sphinxes are more likely to have low allergen cats, but it's not consistent even from one Siberian or one Sphinx to another. But there are a number of ways that people are trying to solve this problem. One is there is a vaccine for people, or at least shots that you can get that tamp down your immune response. But recent news was that a vaccine has been developed for cats to get them to stop producing it. It's not on the market yet, but that could make a big difference. We know the gene that produces these cats, and so there are some people who are working basically on gene therapy to introduce a non-working version of this gene into the cat so they won't produce the protein. So those two efforts would make allergen-free cats that wouldn't be a problem. On the other hand, Nestle Purina has developed a cat food that greatly reduces the amount of protein just from what they eat. And so the cat still produces it, but it gets bound to something and doesn't get secreted. So there are lots, it's a good time. Well, it's not a good time to be allergic to cats, but things are looking up. One thing people might say is, well, if we're going to make the cat stop producing the allergen, maybe that's bad for the cat. Maybe it's there for a reason. Possible. That needs more study. The fact that individual cats vary so greatly in the amount they produce without any obvious side effects suggests that this may not be critical for cats, but that certainly would need to be looked into.
Sounds like a bright future for cat lovers who have cat allergies, which is great. So
Yes,
what's
it's one of
that?
the biggest reasons cats are turned over to cat shelters. And so solving this problem would be great for people and for cats.
That's a great way to end our discussion today, Jonathan. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and a big thank you to Jonathan Losos for sharing some of your work with us today. I found the book completely fascinating, highly recommend it, and of course, look forward to staying in touch.
Well, thanks, Dave. This has been great fun.
And thank you for spending your time with us today, the guests. Wildcats is on now at the ROM. It's a fantastic exhibition, and we hope that we see you again soon at more ROM cat-related programs and in person and online. So please come to the museum and check out the cats exhibit and have a great afternoon.